of Balladrine is north-northeast of Dublin. And the distance, it's said, is half a day's ride for a rich man on a horse and a 2 days walk for a poor man on foot. It's a small town. It is no town that is of anything unusual. The people are people. The crops they grow are the crops they grow, that they grow elsewhere too. There is nothing special about this place. It is merely the town where some of this happens. If you were to travel from Dublin to Balladrine, the road you are on, the first cottage you would come to, has a little garden that's half eaten by rabbits, and has a tree that, though by the name Balladrine, you would think they were oak trees, dreen being Gaelic or something like that. It's Irish! There you go. For oak, but no, the tree there is a cherry tree. And you can tell that the birds are very fond of it. Only half the cherries are there in any one year, and they're a little pitted at. And there's a stone bench under the cherry tree. Now, what you will often not see there is the owner, because the owner is a peddler. And he goes up north and he goes down south. And when he hears women talking about making new clothes, he visits the weavers. And when he hears men talking about the horses needing new shoes, he visits the blacksmith. So, he's a busy man. And he makes a fair amount of money, but not that much, because it's a fair amount of money. He does not overcharge. And when a little boy with no money sees a knucklebone knife and fingers it a little before, more often than not, he'll hand it to the boy and say, "You'd be doing me a favor, lad. The weight of it is too much for me to carry." And when a pretty girl in a patched up dress looks at a ribbon but cannot afford the penny, he'd probably give it to her and say, "Well, you know it's the same color as your eyes. You really should wear this less." So as I say, he made a fair amount of money, but only a fair amount of money, and he worked hard for every penny. And when he came home, as he would going north and then going south, in the middle was Balladrine, the middle of his route, and he would come and he would sit on that bench beneath the cherry tree. And he'd watch as the rabbits started eating his lettuce. And he'd sit there and smile, and his neighbors would say, "A scarecrow would take care of the lettuce for you. And if you were to throw a few stones in that tree, you'd find more cherries and less birds." And he said, "It's true, I'm sure. But you know, in the morning I hear the birds singing, and it wakes me up in a good mood. And at night I have my pipe out here, and I watch the rabbits. And they entertain me, so how can I not repay them?" So there he was. And every time he came home and visited, he enjoyed sitting out there. And every time he would have to leave again and go up the road and down the road, and up the road and down the road. But he grew older, and the times grew a little tighter. And no one could afford the knucklebone knives and the ribbons. And one day he came home and his pack was full and his wallet was empty. And he only had a little food in the larder. But he sat underneath the tree and he watched the rabbits. And then he had his pipe. And he went in, he had a little food, and he went to bed. It wasn't much food there, because he wasn't sure when he would get more food, quite frankly. So perhaps a few spoonful. Nothing much. So he was hungry. And he went to sleep. And as he slept, he dreamed and he smelled roses. But it was fall, there were no roses. Where were the roses coming from? This smell, it was so beautiful, it started to wake him up enough to hear the most beautiful choir in the world. Human voices could not make this sound. And he woke up fully, and he looked, and underneath the bedroom door, he saw a light, and he went out to the main room. And it was filled with blue, the blue you'd see from stained glass, the blue you'd see from the Adriatic, and the blue that says the Virgin Mary is visiting. And there she was, standing in his main room, and she said, "Peddler, go to Dublin. Cross to the south side of the Halfpenny Bridge on the River Liffey, and wait." And then she was gone. And the sound was gone, and the light was gone. And he found himself in his living room, and he thought, oh, it was just a dream, though he could not explain why he still smelled roses. Now, the next morning he got up and he went to church, and he noticed that since times were hard, they could not afford a gardener. So he took care of the gardens around the church, saying, oh, this is something to bring back for the rabbits, never you mind. And he went home and he had a little more food, but he was hungry, and he went to bed, and he smelled roses, and he heard a heavenly choir. And in his living room stood the Virgin Mary saying, "Peddler, go to Dublin. Cross to the south side of the Halfpenny Bridge on the River Liffey and wait." And he woke up. Such a dream. It's just a dream. And the next morning he woke up and he thought, it's a dream. And he thought about it all day. He had the last bit of food. He was hungry. And he went to bed. And again the smell of roses, and again the heavenly choirs, and again the blue of the Virgin Mary. And he said, yes, I will go. And the next morning he walked, and it was a 2-day walk. And if you think maybe a hungry man cannot walk as far as a full man, you have to remember this is Ireland and they're used to hunger. And he was a peddler and he could walk. And in 2 days he reached Dublin. And he walked through the city to the Halfpenny Bridge, which crosses the River Liffey. And he crossed to the south side, and there he waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. But when you have a vision of the Virgin Mary, you don't ask questions. You wait. And that night, he went under the bridge and he slept. And the next morning, he woke up, and he stood by the bridge again, and he waited. And that night, he went beneath the bridge and slept. And the next morning, he got up, and he waited. Now, he was on the west side of the road of the Halfpenny Bridge. On the east side, there was an inn and a pub. And the innkeeper looked out for 3 days and saw this man standing there. And he looked harmless enough, but what was he doing just standing there? What was he doing? On the 3rd evening, he came out and he didn't see him. And then he realized he was sleeping under the bridge. And he said, "Hi, come out from there." And the man came out, and he took him across to his inn, and he put him down, put a mug in front of him, put a sandwich in front of him, and said, "Eat, you're hungry." And the man said, "I can't pay you. Here, half of it." No. My wife's put me on a diet, I'm hungry myself. You can eat. Tell me what you're doing standing by the bridge all day. And the man said, "I'm a peddler. I'm used to standing and waiting. But I'm standing and waiting because I had a dream that the Blessed Virgin visited me and told me to come here and wait." And the innkeeper listened and he looked. The man seemed harmless enough, seemed maybe like he might be sane, couldn't quite tell, might be sane, but he looked at him and he said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What would you do? That was a dream. You know why you dreamed it? Because you're hungry. A full-bellied man does not dream of salvation. Only the hungry dream of salvation. It was a dream. Do you know how I know?" And the peddler said, "No. How do you know?" And the innkeeper said, "Well, for the past week, St. Patrick has appeared in my dream. He sat at this very table, and as I brought him a mug, he would say, 'Oh, innkeeper, you should go to a little town,' that I've never heard of, by the way. 'You should go to a little town northeast of here. It is about half a day's journey for a rich man on a horse and a 2-day walk for a poor man on foot. And when you get there, the first house you'll see will have a cherry tree with a stone bench underneath. And if you were to dig under that bench, you would find a cask of gold left there by Brian Baru. Enough gold to keep you happy for the rest of your life.' Now, do I go and do that? No. And you know why? Because it was a dream," said the peddler. "It's a dream. I'm hungry. Of course I'm going to dream of gold. Of course I'm going to dream of everything I want." "Peddler, stay here the night. Sleep on the bench. In the morning, go home." I'm sure things will be fine. Don't you? The peddler had to admit he thought maybe things would be fine. And he woke up the next morning. And he took off on the road, and it perhaps took him a little less than 2 days to walk back home. I wasn't there, I couldn't tell. And when he got there, he dug underneath that stone bench, and sure enough, 4 feet down was a cask of gold, certainly left by Brian Boru. Now, the peddler had no need for that much money. He would be happy with far less that was there. So he gave some to the church. And he gave some to the little boys that couldn't afford a knuckle-bone knife. And he left some tied with ribbon in front of the houses of the girls who could not afford a penny's worth of ribbon. And he lived a good life. He made a bigger garden so the more rabbits would come. He planted a few more cherry trees so there'd be more birds. And from that day to this, he's still on that road. He still travels up and travels down, and he brings knuckle-bone knives and ribbons and things that you need, because that's all he needs. That's all the Virgin Mary ever wanted for him. And that is the story of the peddler of Balladry.